Pere of Aragon, the king who died protecting his people. When I first read The Fall of Gil-galad by Tolkien, I was a teenager seeking consolation and escape from the hardships of life. The magic of those words, describing a mysterious elven king, was captivating and enchanting. Like many others who encountered Tolkien under similar circumstances, I fell under their charm. I adored this imaginary king without knowing precisely who he was, and I sided with him without subjecting the world he inhabited, or the causes he fought for, to any rational analysis. Tolkien, much like the branch of religion he devoutly followed, appeals primarily to emotion and imagination, drawing in young romantic minds carried away by the magical flow of words and scenes. But decades passed. Some silver crept into my hair, and I returned to these verses from a very different place. The poetry of reality dispelled those elven charms once and for all. Now I stand my ground and view the world not through the illusions of reverie, but through the bittersweet truths of the age of reason. It is somewhat poignant, but sweet medicines are of no use. After all these decades of searching, I finally know the true name of the king described in that poem, and there is nothing elven about him. He was a real mortal human king, of flesh that felt dread and pain, and of blood that flows away so quickly, along with life, with no second chance. He was a king who gave his life protecting his vassals and friends from real danger in the real world, under the painfully real heat of the southern sun. And he is the hero of the story I will tell you today. The Kingdom of Aragon and the South. To understand King Pere, we must first understand the world he ruled. The Counts of Barcelona became kings of Aragon in 1137, a union that created a powerful realm spanning the Iberian Peninsula and reaching deep into southern France. When Pere II ascended the throne in 1196, he inherited not just a kingdom, but a web of loyalties, alliances, and obligations that stretched across the Pyrenees into the sun-drenched lands of Occitania. Pere held vassals in Occitania, including the Counts of Comminges and Foix. Through his marriage to the heiress of Montpellier, he formed an alliance with Raymond VI of Toulouse. These ties gave him strong political and personal reasons to defend his southern subjects. He was their king, their protector, their lord, and when danger came for them, he would not look away. Simon de Montfort and the Albigensian Crusade. In November 1212, the situation looked precarious for the chief crusader and self-styled athlete of Christ, Simon de Montfort. His campaign in Occitania, begun under the banner of rooting out the Cathar heresy, had transformed into something far more ambitious, the conquest and subjugation of an entire region. Feeling insecure in his newly seized territories, Montfort codified his control in the Statutes of Pamiers, a harsh legal framework drawn from northern French tradition. These statutes required his vassals to provide increased knight service, to ensure those knights were of French origin, to seek his permission before leaving Occitania, and to surrender their towns and fortifications upon his demand. Movement restrictions that would not look out of place in a modern authoritarian state were imposed on a population that had never known such constraints. The message was clear. Montfort did not trust the people he had conquered, and the people of Occitania, their nobles, their consuls, their farmers and merchants, had every reason to fear what came next. Pere's diplomatic offensive. King Pere did not ride immediately to war. He began with diplomacy. On the 16th of January 1213, he petitioned an assembly of Roman prelates gathered at the castle of Lavore. He requested the restoration of the lands of his vassals, the Count of Comminges, the Count of Foix, and Gaston of Béarn. He urged the prelates to consider restoring the rights of the Count of Toulouse, or at least those of his 15-year-old son. None of the three had been formally accused of heresy. Yet the assembly rejected the petition, arguing guilt by association, that these lords had sheltered heretics, supported them, or aided those who did. Pere also proposed a truce between the Crusaders and his barons until Easter or Pentecost of that year. This too was rejected. The prelates feared a truce would slow the flow of new Crusaders into the south. It is worth pausing here to consider what this tells us. This was not a neutral church reluctantly presiding over secular violence. The Roman legates were directly involved in dispossessing secular lords, in rejecting peace proposals, and in sustaining a war that served their political interests. The apologetic narrative, that the Church merely sought to guide lost souls while leaving violence to others, is contradicted at every turn by the historical record. The Pope intervenes. But Pere was not finished. In a strategically astute move, he had already appealed directly to Pope Innocent III several weeks before the council at Lavore. His envoys argued that the original objective of the crusade had been achieved, and that Montfort had transformed it into a campaign of personal territorial expansion. Innocent III, himself growing wary of Montfort's accumulating power, was receptive. He temporarily suspended the crusade and ceased granting indulgences to its participants. On the 18th of January 1213, he wrote to his legates, Arnaud Amaury and Theodosius, accusing them of enabling Montfort to occupy lands that were not his to take. Without papal support, Montfort risked losing both the moral justification for his war and the steady flow of recruits that sustained it. As the chronicler Pere of Aragon reluctantly noted, fewer crusaders enlisted that year. Montfort could not attempt another siege of Toulouse. The loyalty of Occitania. These diplomatic victories earned King Pere something more valuable than territory: loyalty. The counts of Toulouse, Foix, and Comines, along with their sons and Gaston of Béarn, offered oaths of allegiance to the king who had defended them against, in the words of the time, the clerks and the French. And remarkably, 24 consuls of Toulouse swore loyalty to Pere as well. This matters. Toulouse in the High Middle Ages was no ordinary city. It possessed elements of democratic governance unusual for the era. Consuls elected from among prominent citizens who governed alongside the count. When those consuls chose Pere over Montfort, they were not merely following their lord, they were making a political choice. Both the nobility and the urban population of Occitania saw Pere of Aragon as a preferable suzerain, a protector rather than a conqueror. The small fortress that changed everything. Despite papal hesitation, crusaders continued arriving in Occitania in May of 1213, fulfilling their 40-day service obligations. Their numbers were smaller than in previous years, but Montfort put them to work, not in open battle, but in devastation. Crops, orchards, and vineyards around Toulouse were burned and destroyed. Among the targets was a small site called Pujol, described in the sources as a munitio, a modest fortified position, weaker than a proper castle. Located about 13 kilometers southeast of Toulouse, Montfort had allowed 3 of his knights to use it as a base for raids on the city. For 4 years, Toulouse had endured constant harassment from positions like this one. Raymond VI of Toulouse decided that enough was enough. He assembled the forces of the Southern Alliance, contingents from Foix and Comines, Spanish troops, Routier, and the Toulousan militia, and marched on Pujol. They besieged it with catapults and siege engines, using the same tactics the Crusaders had used to dismember Occitania piece by piece. The fortress fell. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The aura of Crusader invincibility, built over years of siege after siege, of castle after castle falling to Montfort's forces, was shattered by the fall of a minor fortified position. The methods of the Crusaders could be learned, could be replicated, could be turned against them. Momentum was shifting. Recruitment for the crusade was declining, and news was spreading that King Pere of Aragon was gathering his forces to ride to the aid of his Occitan subjects. A small munitio had humbled a formidable force, yet history has shown time and again how things fall apart. To be continued.